Margaret Lawson stood silently at the edge of the graveyard. The cold wind of the Cotswolds whispered through the willow trees, carrying the soft rustle of leaves. Before her lay the freshly covered grave of Edward Lawson, her husband. The man she had loved for so many years. Her heart ached with loss, but there was also a strange unease she could not shake. As the church bells faded into the distance, Margaret noticed an envelope resting on the grave. It was sealed with a familiar crest, Edward's handwriting scrawled on the front. With trembling hands, she broke the seal and pulled out a letter. The words inside were unexpected. "This letter can only be read at my grave. Within it lies a secret I have carried for years. A truth that might change everything." Margaret's eyes scanned the lines again, confusion and curiosity battling within her. What secret could Edward have kept hidden until now? And why here, at his resting place? The sky darkened as clouds rolled in, mirroring the storm brewing in her mind. Clutching the letter, Margaret knew she had a choice to make. To stay in grief or to seek the truth that might bring both pain and hope. With a deep breath, she whispered her final goodbye to Edward. Her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "I promise to find the truth, whatever it may be." And with that, a new chapter of her life quietly began. Margaret returned home from the funeral in a daze. The letter clutched tightly in her hand weighed heavier than any grief she had felt so far. That evening, the small cottage in the Cotswolds felt colder, emptier. Edward's chair sat untouched by the fireplace, his favorite books resting on the shelf as if waiting for him to return. Margaret sat down at the old wooden desk in the corner of the room. She unfolded the letter once again, reading Edward's words carefully. "Within the grounds of our family estate lies a secret, a journal that holds the key to our past. It is not just a collection of memories, but a map to something much greater. You must find it." Her mind raced. The family estate. The place they had visited only a few weeks before Edward fell ill. The sprawling gardens, the ancient oak tree near the pond, the ivy crawling up the stone walls, each detail flashing vividly in her memory. Determined to uncover the truth, Margaret rummaged through Edward's study. Drawers creaked open and closed as she searched for any clue, any sign of the mysterious journal. Hours passed, the moon casting pale light through the window. Then, beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace, her fingers brushed against a leather-bound book. It was old, worn, and sealed with a faded ribbon. Her heart pounded as she carefully opened it. The pages were filled with Edward's neat handwriting, sketches of maps, cryptic notes, and dates going back generations. It spoke of family secrets buried deep beneath the earth of the Cotswolds, secrets that some would kill to protect. As Margaret turned the pages, she felt Edward's presence beside her, guiding her through memories she had never known. His voice echoed in her mind, a whisper urging her forward. But the journal also held warnings. Shadows from the past were still watching, and not everyone wanted the truth to surface. Margaret closed the book with a heavy sigh. Her journey had just begun, and the path ahead was uncertain and dangerous. Yet, beneath the fear, a spark of hope ignited within her. For the first time since Edward's death, she felt alive with purpose. The following morning, the mist clung low over the rolling hills of the Cotswolds. Margaret set out towards the family estate, clutching Edward's journal tightly against her chest. The journey felt heavier than ever before, the silence around her only broken by the crunch of leaves under her feet. As she approached the ancient stone gates, memories flooded back, Edward's laughter echoing through the gardens, their late afternoon walks by the pond, the warmth of a life once shared. But now, beneath the beauty of the estate, there was a tension she could not ignore. Margaret's fingers trembled as she unlocked the heavy wooden door. Inside, the house smelled of dust and forgotten time. She moved carefully through the rooms, searching for any sign that could lead her to the hidden journal's secret. The journal's pages spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the old oak tree near the pond. Legend said the tree had witnessed centuries of family history, guarding stories too dangerous for daylight. Margaret stepped outside, the crisp air sharp against her skin. The oak tree stood tall and proud, its gnarled branches twisting skywards like ancient fingers. She circled the base, searching for anything unusual. After minutes of careful inspection, her hand brushed against a loose stone near the roots. Heart pounding, she pressed it gently, and a section of earth shifted open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Taking a deep breath, Margaret descended. The air grew cooler and damp as she moved further underground. The walls were lined with old stone, etched with faded symbols she could barely understand. At the end of the staircase, a small chamber awaited. On a pedestal lay a weathered chest, bound with iron and covered in dust. Margaret's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were relics of a past life, letters, photographs, and a small wooden box. She lifted the box carefully and opened it to find a delicate locket and a folded note. The note was addressed to her, written in Edward's unmistakable hand. My dearest Margaret. If you are reading this, then you have found what I could not share in life. Forgive me for the shadows that have followed me. This locket holds a secret of our family's past, one that will change everything you believe. Trust yourself, and above all, trust the love that binds us still. Margaret closed her eyes, the weight of Edward's words settling over her like a gentle rain. The path ahead was darker than she had imagined, but she knew she was not alone. With the locket in her hand and Edward's journal tucked under her arm, Margaret ascended the stairs. Outside, the sun was breaking through the mist, casting golden light over the estate. It was a small promise of hope. Margaret barely had time to breathe after her discovery beneath the old oak tree. The locket and journal weighed heavily in her bag, a constant reminder of the mystery she had promised to unravel. But the quiet peace of the Cotswolds was beginning to feel fragile, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. That afternoon, while she sat in the garden sipping tea, a stranger appeared at the gate. A tall man, his coat buttoned high against the chill, introduced himself simply as Mr. Harper. His polite smile did little to mask the sharpness in his eyes. I believe you've come across something that does not belong to you, he said softly. Margaret's heart pounded. How did he know? She clutched the bag tighter. I'm not sure what you mean, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Mr. Harper's gaze did not waver. The Lawson family has enemies, ones who would go to great lengths to protect certain truths. You would do well to be cautious. Before Margaret could respond, he turned and left, his footsteps fading quickly down the gravel path. Unease settled over her like a cold shroud. Who could this man be, and what dangers lurked in the shadows of her own home? That night, Margaret found herself unable to sleep. She revisited Edward's journal again, searching for any hint of danger. The entries spoke of betrayals, old feuds, and a powerful secret kept by the Lawson ancestors, a secret that some had killed to guard. The locket, she realized, was more than just a keepsake. It was a key, both literal and metaphorical, that might unlock the final piece of the puzzle. Margaret resolved to follow Edward's clues deeper into the estate. She was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the unknown alone. But as the moon cast eerie shadows over the land, she understood that her journey would not be without sacrifice. Trust was fragile, and the past was not yet done with her. The following days were a blur of investigation and quiet tension. Margaret moved carefully through the estate, piecing together the fragments of Edward's cryptic notes. Each clue led her deeper into the heart of the family's hidden history, and closer to the truth Edward had buried so deeply. One morning, as the sun spilled golden light across the rolling fields, Margaret found herself standing before a small, neglected greenhouse hidden behind the old stables. According to the journal, this was the next piece of the puzzle. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten flowers. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that filtered through cracked glass panes. Margaret's fingers traced the outlines of withered plants, searching for anything out of place. Then, tucked inside a rusty iron box beneath the workbench, she discovered a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Her heart quickened as she unfolded them. The letters were between Edward's grandfather, Henry Lawson, and a mysterious woman named Clara. The words spoke of love and betrayal, of a promise made and broken. Clara had been Henry's secret, a truth carefully hidden from the rest of the family. The letters hinted at a treasure, one not of gold or jewels, but of knowledge and power. Margaret sat back, overwhelmed by the weight of the revelation. Edward had been trying to protect her, to shield her from a legacy more dangerous than she could imagine. She looked down at the locket in her hand once more. Inside, a tiny key was nestled within the delicate design, a key that might open the final lock to the Lawson family secret. But the shadows around her grew longer. The warning in Edward's journal was clear. Someone else knew of the treasure, and they were watching. Margaret steeled herself. She would face whatever came next with courage. For Edward, for the family, and for the future she had yet to claim. It was just after dawn when Margaret returned to the place Edward's journal had referenced again and again, the small chapel ruins nestled at the edge of the moor. Morning mist clung low to the ground, casting the crumbling stones in a ghostly hue. Her boots sank into the dewy grass as she crossed the threshold. Ivy trailed over what remained of the chapel walls, and wildflowers grew where pews had once stood. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of birds. According to the journal, the final clue was buried beneath the altar stone. Margaret hesitated, glancing behind her. The air felt still, too still, as if time itself was holding its breath. She knelt down and began brushing away leaves and moss from the old slab. Her fingers trembled as she searched for the crevice Edward had described. Then, there it was, a thin gap just wide enough for the tiny key. With a breath held tight in her chest, she slid the key into the opening. There was a faint click, and the slab shifted slightly. Heart pounding, Margaret heaved it aside, revealing a narrow space underneath. Within it lay a wooden box, worn but intact, sealed with the Lawson family crest burned into the top. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, she found documents, old, fragile, and inked with names she recognized from Edward's stories. Maps of the land, deed records, and a sealed letter addressed to her. She opened the letter carefully. It was from Edward. My dearest Margaret. If you are reading this, then you have followed my path and found what so many tried to hide. The Lawson estate was built not just with land and labor, but with choices, some noble, some unforgivable. This truth may burden you, but it will also free you. Inside this box are the rights to land long disputed, to a library of knowledge hidden beneath our home, and to a truth that reclaims our family's honor. I never wanted this legacy to fall on you, but I've come to see there is no one more capable. You see, love, your courage was always greater than mine. Forgive me for the distance I kept. You deserved more. But I trust now, you will write the ending to our story with your own hand. Forever yours. Edward. Tears blurred Margaret's vision. She pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by love and sorrow. Edward hadn't just left her memories, he'd left her the key to rebuild everything. She examined the other contents. Among them was a smaller iron ring, tied to a faded leather tag that read, Library Cellar, South Corridor. It all made sense now. The family's private library, a place Edward never allowed others into, wasn't just a collection of dusty books. It was the vault of generations. She stood, holding the box close. The wind stirred the chapel vines, like whispers from the past. But Margaret was not alone. As she turned to leave, a shadow detached from the chapel wall. Mr. Harper emerged again, calm as ever, hands tucked behind his back. I had a feeling you'd make it here, he said, voice low. Margaret stood firm, her eyes blazing. What do you want? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want what's inside that box. What should have been mine by right? Margaret stepped back, clutching the heirloom. You're not a Lawson. No, he said slowly. But my mother was. A child cast aside. Everything you've found belongs to me just as much as it does to you. The threat in his voice was real, but so was Margaret's resolve. Then you should have found it yourself, she replied. Edward trusted me with this. I won't let you take it. A tense silence hung between them. Then Harper laughed, a bitter sound. This isn't over. He turned and walked away, vanishing into the mist as swiftly as he'd come. Margaret stood still for a long while, breath trembling. The box in her arms held more than papers and truth, it held power. And now she understood. With it came danger, but also a chance to reclaim not only Edward's memory, but the future of the Lawson name. She returned to the manor under the pale light of morning, her steps slow but certain. The shadows had spoken. Now, it was her turn. The morning after her confrontation with Mr. Harper, Margaret rose before the sun. The manor sat in heavy silence, cloaked in a fog that seemed reluctant to lift. Every creaking floorboard and shifting shadow reminded her that someone was watching, that the secrets she now held could cost her dearly. Still, she didn't falter. She gripped the iron ring she had found in the chapel, marked Library Cellar, South Corridor, and made her way through the silent corridors of Whitmore Hall. The grand portraits of ancestors gazed down at her as she passed, their painted eyes seemingly alive with unspoken warning. The library, once Edward's most sacred space, now stood as a gateway. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and varnished wood. Dust clung to the curtains, but the books remained pristine, meticulously arranged as though Edward had only just stepped out. She searched the south corridor of the library, running her fingers along the wood-paneled walls. Behind a tall, unmarked bookshelf, she found it, a discreet iron door, almost invisible if one didn't know where to look. The key fit perfectly. The lock gave a low groan as it turned, and the door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness. Margaret lit a lantern and descended, her steps echoing into the cold beneath the earth. The passage opened into a stone chamber, unlike anything she expected. It wasn't a vault of treasure, but a sanctuary of knowledge. Shelves lined the walls, filled with manuscripts bound in cracked leather and sheaves of parchment aged by centuries. A long table stood in the center, scattered with documents left mid-research. On the far wall hung an enormous map of the Lake District, with specific plots of land marked in red. She approached the table and picked up a set of files marked Lawson Mining Company. Inside were detailed records, proof that the Lawson family had once operated an illegal mining business beneath private land, hidden for generations. The mines were shut down following a fatal accident, hushed with bribes and sealed with forged documents. But it was more than that. There were letters implicating former family members in blackmail, land fraud, and the silencing of whistleblowers. And there were also accounts of those who had tried to speak out, some of whom had mysteriously vanished. Margaret stood frozen. The legacy Edward had kept hidden wasn't just a matter of inheritance, it was a matter of guilt, of scandal, of lives ruined and erased. Now she understood why Edward had chosen her. Not to guard the truth, but to expose it. She turned to the final drawer in the table, where a slim box lay, sealed in wax. It was addressed not to her, but to the Crown Prosecution Service. Inside were signed confessions, including one by Edward himself. I was born into a name I never chose, the confession began. For years I watched our family bury its sins with pride and money. I have no children. No heirs. No legacy I wish to leave but this, the truth. Margaret's knees gave way, and she sank into the chair behind her. The burden now fell to her, not just to protect a family name, but to cleanse it. But as she sat in that quiet crypt of truth, she heard something shift above. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. She extinguished the lantern and crouched low, her heart thundering. The door creaked. A sliver of light appeared at the top of the staircase, followed by the silhouette of a man. It was Harper. "I knew you'd come here," his voice echoed down the stairs. Margaret said nothing. She moved quietly toward the shelves, grabbing one of the heavier manuscripts. Harper descended, one hand in his coat pocket. "You've read it, haven't you? The truth that could bring the entire family to its knees." "I have," Margaret replied, stepping out of the shadows, "and so will the world." He sneered. "You'd ruin everything. You'd bring disgrace to the family, to Edward's name." "I'd rather live in disgrace than under a lie," she said, raising her voice. "Edward understood that. That's why he left it to me." Harper stepped closer, but Margaret stood firm. "Don't," she warned. "I've already sent copies of these documents to my solicitor. If anything happens to me, the whole truth will go public." There was a moment of silence. Harper's jaw tightened. Then, without another word, he turned and retreated up the stairs. The vault door slammed shut. Margaret stood alone in the silence, the final truths flickering in her lantern's glow. Her pulse raced, but she no longer felt afraid. The path ahead was dangerous. But she was ready. And she was no longer walking in Edward's shadow. She was walking toward the light. The wind stirred gently over the moors as Margaret stood before Edward's grave once more. It had been a fortnight since she uncovered the family's deepest secret in the vault beneath the library. The fog had lifted, quite literally and figuratively, but what remained was the weight of responsibility, like a cloak she had willingly wrapped around herself. Edward's gravestone was simple. No grand inscription, just his name, and the years he had lived. She traced the carved letters with her gloved fingers. Edward Whitmore. 1946 to 2025. A man of restraint. A man who had hidden his shame behind polished shoes and well-groomed charm. And yet, he had given her the key, not just to the vault, but to freedom. Margaret had acted swiftly. The documents from the cellar had been copied, catalogued, and handed over to her solicitor. She'd met with Crown prosecutors behind closed doors in London, and though they warned her of the media storm to come, she had not flinched. What the Whitmore family had buried for generations would now be brought into the light. She had also faced Harrison. He had come to the manor with entitlement burning in his eyes, still convinced that money could wash away what the law now threatened to expose. "You've destroyed us," he hissed. "No," she replied quietly. "I've ended the lie." Harrison was now under investigation for his role in attempting to conceal evidence. And as for Mr. Harper, he had vanished. The police had an arrest warrant out, and whispers traveled fast through the halls of influence in London. Still, the storm had not passed. But Margaret stood firm. She'd spent days writing a public letter, one she knew would be reprinted in every major paper from London to Edinburgh. In it, she told the truth, not just about the Whitmores, but about the silence that power demanded, and the courage it took to speak. But now, here she stood, alone at Edward's resting place, the final letter in her pocket. Not for the courts. Not for the public. But for him. She opened it with trembling fingers and began to read aloud. "You told me once that legacies are written not in wealth, but in what we leave behind in others. I never thought I'd be the one to write yours. You could have chosen any solicitor, any institution, any historical society to guard your truth. But you chose me. I hated you for a time. For the loneliness. For the silence. For making me live beside a man I never fully knew. But I understand now. You left me with a choice. To hide or to reveal. To carry your burden or burn it to the ground. I chose truth. And in doing so, I chose myself. I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I must. And I hope, wherever you are, you can forgive yourself too." Her voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. This is the last time I'll come here, Edward. I've bought a cottage near Coniston Water. It's small. Quiet. I'm going to paint again. I'm going to walk without wondering if I'm being watched. And I'm going to write, to tell the stories of women who stayed too quiet for too long. You gave me the beginning. Now I'll write the rest. She folded the letter and placed it at the base of the headstone. The grass moved gently in the breeze, and for a moment, the birdsong returned. Margaret turned away from the grave, her steps light. As she walked down the path leading away from the burial grounds, a young woman stood waiting by the iron gate. A journalist. One of many who had written to Margaret for comment. Margaret nodded at her. The woman approached hesitantly. Mrs. Whitmore. I just wanted to say, you've done something brave. Margaret smiled gently. No. I've done what should have been done a long time ago. She stepped past her and into the sunlight, leaving behind the stone, the name, and the legacy that once held her captive. The last words she had whispered at Edward's grave were not for the dead, but for herself. I am free now.